We've got it, and I am welcoming all of you here tonight. I'm Loretta Sepinen. It was 15 months ago I began thinking about the need for this very event. I wanted for myself to learn more about the Growth Management Act, GMA, and comprehensive plans. And I wanted to be part of a community of people who are well prepared for the next 2 years of volunteering our time to update my city's and our county's comprehensive plans. I started twisting a few arms and to see who can help me create this event, and people responded positively. And that includes the newly formed Local Good Governance Coalition, the committee of volunteers, all working even right now behind the scenes, Thurston Climate Action Team, TCAT, who is hosting tonight, and Thurston League of Women Voters hosting the next event. You'll hear about at the end of the program. And very importantly, the speakers for tonight. I thank all of them, and I'm ready to learn. And I thank you for being ready to learn with me. Let me introduce Christy Barkinger, one of the committee volunteers, and she's going to facilitate our evening tonight. Christy.
Thank you, Loretta. Again, welcome. Thank you for coming to join us on this beautiful evening. We have a lot that we're going to cover tonight with some really specific objectives. So just a quick overview. I've got about 10 minutes where we're going to just welcome and do a little bit of framing, like what are we here for? And then the rest of the evening is split up into basically 25-minute sections for Comprehensive Plan Update 101, a spotlight on what's new in housing, and a spotlight on meeting the urgency of climate change. There will be 2 presenters for the Planned Update 101 and the climate change, and 1 presenter for housing. And at the end of each of those 20-minute sections, we'll have 5 minutes for question and answer. And then just a brief period of what's next at the very end. We're on Zoom, obviously. So it works a little bit differently than gathering in person. Given the size of our group, do please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. It's really easy to get background noise going, and I often have forgotten that I am unmuted. And I have 2 dogs, 2 cats, and an 11-month-old, so it can get loud pretty fast. For the Q&A, we're going to use the chat function. If you haven't used Zoom very much before, if you put your cursor kind of at the bottom of your screen, you should see a bar that pops up with some of these different options. If you see the chat and click on that, it should open a chat box to the side, and then you can type in there. We're going to primarily use this for question and answer. So as we're going through, we'll have moments to pause, and you can type questions, kind of pull your thoughts together, pause or type questions. And then at the end of each section, we will cover the questions that we can. So to kind of start out, why are we here? Well, if you're here, you might be interested in things like climate resilience and climate mitigation. You might be here because you're interested in sustainable economic growth, community participation and planning, and safe and affordable housing. If you're here, we're assuming that you are part of this group where we have a shared interest in shaping a livable future by putting affordable housing and climate change at the front and center of government policies and decision making. So a lot of things that we could prioritize, and we're saying these are 2 things that everything else can kind of spin back to and really make a difference in shaping a livable future for our communities. Why now? Well, from now through 2024, Thurston County residents have a once-a-decade opportunity to make our voices heard in setting goals and policies that will drive all major decision-making and funding in our local governments for years to come. So right now, and presenters will talk a lot more about this, there's something called the comprehensive plan. And we have a current comprehensive plan. The cities in Thurston County do, Thurston County itself. The last full update process was last completed in 2014. And that's the comprehensive plan that kind of drives everything that goes on in the jurisdictions. There are these yearly amendment processes, but the last full, really comprehensive update was in 2014. And I don't know, if you think back to 2014, it seems like we were living in kind of a different world because a lot of things have changed. So the fact that we have a plan driving everything that was updated in 2014 means it's time to update it again. So between 2022 and 2024, we've got this required comprehensive plan update process. This is required by the state, and all of our jurisdictions go through it. After this opportunity that we're here to talk about today, there's no large-scale plan updates that will be put into action until 2035. Right? So now's the time to act, to really have an influence on this comprehensive plan update process. Why now? Why today? Well, speaking up now means that what's important to you gets more prioritized, included in the scope of planning, which then drives the priorities of the planning updates that happen over the next 2 years. So between now and fall of 2022, depending on what jurisdiction, each jurisdiction will set the scope of the update, and our voices have an impact on that, what gets included in the scope of the update. Fall to winter 2022, each jurisdiction will create a community engagement plan. And then there's these cycles of plan review, update, stakeholder input. That's where we come in, and planning commission approvals. And then finally, October to December 2024, there's lots of approvals that happen and presentations, and there's the final update. So we want to get on this action now to help set the scope. Why community engagement? This is a state required thing. Jurisdictions have plan requirements and plan guidance that both come from the state. They update their plans. The plans get submitted to the state. And then you would imagine that the state might check the plan for compliance with the plan requirements. But that doesn't actually happen. That's not how the process works. Local plans are actually assumed to be acceptable when they're adopted by cities or counties, and can only be changed if an appeal is filed and a hearing board or a court determines that the plan doesn't comply with the Growth Management Act with the requirements. So I'm kind of new to this process, and that was a surprise to me. So for a variety of reasons, Washington state government does not have a compliance enforcement role in checking submitted comprehensive plans. So the big takeaway here is, if cities, counties, or other jurisdictions submit comp plans and policies that aren't in compliance with planning goals and requirements, the only way to ensure revision and compliance is through community engagement. That's us. So the way this flow chart really works is we engage with the update process. The plan gets submitted to the state, and then we can be part of checking for compliance and engaging in an appeal process if necessary. To put it in context, we've had some wins around these things we're interested in. Thurston County, Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater adopted the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. Washington legislature passed House Bill 1220, requiring comprehensive planning for housing at all income levels. And then this comp plan update is an opportunity to ensure that similar requirements for planning for climate mitigation and climate resilience are included in the comprehensive plans. So that's how it ties into two of our main interests here. So starting tonight, so that we can advocate for the tomorrow that we really need, there's a lot of different terms, there's a lot of different words, and part of this is just speaking the language. So we're going to learn about the importance of and the components of a comprehensive plan. And we're going to start developing some action steps for engaging with this complex long-term planning update process. So in a whirlwind, we're going to get started. So I'm going to send the mic over here to Nina to talk about the Growth Management Act and the Land Use Law. Nina, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Well, I want to talk about the GMA, the history and how it works. Next slide, please. Because you're changing the slides for me, right? Or somebody is. No, back. Okay, I've got 5 points to make. The history of land use laws in Washington. Why do we have a Growth Management Act? Although Christy did an excellent job covering the basics. And what does it require? And then how it's enforced, and some conclusions and take-home messages. Next slide, please. So the history of land use in Washington state. I don't know how many of you were here in the 70s and 80s, and if we were in a giant room, we could all raise our hand. I moved here in 79, and this place looked a lot different. But then only local city and county zoning laws govern development. That is how much you had to set back from a property line, or whether or not you had to have a sewer or a septic. And there was no overall planning required statewide. In fact, there are no other states in the country that have statewide planning until, here, let's go to a next thing, until later. So during this time in the 70s and 80s, some of us watched forests and farmlands going under to housing and commercial developments. I'm sure you've all seen it in the past, and even now you see it. Next slide. But also there were people concerned about economic development and jobs. For example, over in Eastern Washington, in the 80s, there was a lot of economic stagnation, and there was also here in Western Washington. And so some legislators wanted to lobby for economic development, not just preserve farms and forest lands. And an example I found here was in 1980, Spokane had a huge economic decline because of silver, timber, and farm prices dropping. So their legislators were very concerned about economic development. Next slide, please. So with all of that pressure going on, the legislature finally had to act. A lot of folks were telling them, you've got to deal with this development that's coming in, because one of the things that started happening is that the current taxpayers, me living in Olympia, I was paying for new roads, new water, new schools for the new development coming in, and there was no requirement for the new developers to pay for that. So over the year or so, 1990, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but there is Maria Cantwell right in front of the microphone in the middle of this black and white slide. Jennifer Belcher is next to her, Mary Margaret Haugen. There were many legislators that worked on several different committees to pull all these different bills together on land use, transportation, environment, economic development. And Booth Gardner signed the bill into law in 1990, and that's the Growth Management Act, which is revised Code of Washington 3670A. Next slide, please. So why do we have the GMA? One thing I wanted to say, back on that other slide, we don't have to go back, but one thing I wanted to say is that Joe King, one of the fellows on the black and white picture, he said this bill was never designed to stop growth. It was designed to measure growth and to make sure that we had enough money to pay for it. So it was not this big push to stop growth, it's a way to plan for it. And the reason they said that is they said population's gonna continue increasing, including climate refugees, although they didn't refer to people like that then. But now we know climate refugees and our population is just going to continue increasing. In fact, the state Office of Financial Management sends out population projections to local governments so that they can plan ahead. So that's one of the first steps that happens before the cities or counties start to put their comprehensive plans together. The other reason we have the GMA is that our elected officials need to decide where we're going to have housing, businesses, industry, ag, mining, recreation, you name it. They've got to figure out where all of this is going to go, and they have to work with the public and interest groups. So not just citizens, but a lot of different interest groups. And the last one, which I really want to emphasize again, is that they've got to do long-range planning so that they have a tax structure in place that isn't just on the current residents, but also into the future. So that's why new development pays for impact fees. And so we can argue about whether or not that's enough on those impact fees, but that was one of the main messages of the GMA. Next slide, please. I want to focus on this concept of population because, okay, everybody says we know more people are coming here. Well, look at the column. Look at the column on the further on the right here, 2020. Look at how many people we have, over 7.5 million. Up, go back, there you go. Go back to the left side where it says 1980. This is when I moved here, and so we had 4 million. Now we're over here to 2020. We're at 7.5 million. Ooh, go forward again to 2040. Oh, wow, 9.25 million. So that's 20 years from now. I have a question for all you, don't have to answer. Can you think back 20 years? Where were you just after 9/11? Okay, we can all know that. That seems like a flash, right? Next slide, please. We're gonna have to figure out in Thurston County. I'd like you to go to your pointer with Thurston County, go over to the right side in 2020, the red number there, population 294, that's where we are today. In 2040, we're gonna be at 370. And as Christy just said, the next planning update is in 2035. So look at this middle number, Thurston County increase. Look at that, 76,000 right in the middle of the page. 76,366 more people are going to be moving here. There's no question about it. So the questions are on the right-hand corner here, where to put another 76,000 people in our county. And a hint is that Olympia and Tumwater population today is 75,000. So this is the big question that this elected officials in the city and the county have to answer. Where are we going to put all these people? Jobs, roads, schools, transportation, infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the GMA requires that the county and city have to decide where they're going to put these people, and they have to balance 14 goals. And these goals are not in priority order. They are saying things like, make sure you don't have too much sprawl, push your cities to grow, urban growth, make sure you have transportation, housing, economic development. You can see the whole list here.
Nina,
And
we
also,
have 2 minutes.
Okay, and go to the next slide, please. So the GMA does require the comp plans be developed by the cities and counties. You can see the top level there, Growth Management Act, and countywide planning, and then local government. And then let's go to this next slide, which says, who enforces this? Well, the reason the GMA was amended in 1991 is they forgot to put in an enforcement agency. There is no agency charged with enforcing this, unlike the shoreline master plans, for example, that Department of Ecology has to review and approve. So as Christy said, the only way to enforce the GMA is through citizen lawsuits. And next slide, please. This goes to the Growth Management Hearings Board, of which I was a member for 12 years until last October. We have 5 administrative law judges. They serve on regional panels throughout the state. They review the comp plans and the regulations, not projects. And the review is on the record, not de novo. This means it's not like you can bring in new information at the end. You have to show your evidence of why you are opposing this plan from the very beginning. That's why this forum is very important for people to get involved with. There's also a narrow jurisdiction for GMA, and the decisions that the board makes are limited to very clearly stated issues. Two last things. The local government, cities and counties are presumed to be in compliance. They are presumed to be innocent. So if you bring an appeal, the board is going to assume that the city and county are innocent until you can prove them wrong. But the board will issue a decision within 6 months to let you know. Next slide, please. So as I said before, citizens are the watchdogs of the GMA. And if you're concerned about the plans, that they're not consistent with the GMA, you have 60 days to appeal it. You need to lawyer up. There's only one nonprofit group in the state of Washington, FutureWise, that really advocates for GMA compliance. And then there are other local groups. There's an Olympia group here has done this, but FutureWise is the only nonprofit here that takes care of these appeals. Next slide, please. And so the conclusion is get involved now when the plans are beginning to set the stage, and know the requirements. Unfortunately, you might have to start learning how the GMA is structured and some of the requirements in it, but it's not too difficult. There's a lot of good information at Commerce on their website. 3 is to voice your opinion and preferences now, and scoping the plan right now is really important, and be ready to learn and to compromise, because you're not going to get everything, but just be ready to learn a lot. And then the last point is to become familiar with the GMA and the appeals process at the Growth Board's website. And one final conclusion, we are only 2 states in the country that have any statewide planning. Oregon has statewide planning, but theirs is top down, where they have a state agency that oversees it. Ours is bottom up, where you, citizens, get to make sure it happens the right way and in compliance with the GMA. So that's my comment. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you. So we're going to take about 30 seconds. Just a quick break. Write questions in the chat box that came up for you as Nina was presenting for our Q&A at the end of the section. Nathaniel is going to be presenting next. So quick 30 seconds. Write some questions in the chat box, and then we'll get to that after Nathaniel speaks. Okay. Nathaniel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Christy. I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm really pleased at the turnout this evening. And I also want to thank the Local Good Government Coalition for their commitment to active participation in the comp plan update process. From my perspective, this process may be the closest our government system comes to direct democracy. It's where local residents take part in authentic dialogue and deliberations about what they want for their community. And the growth management process links the outcome of those deliberations to a set of responsive goals, policies, and even regulations that will define much of the role of local Thurston government for years to come. Now, I think it's worth taking a moment to look back at the legislature's motivation for creating the Growth Management Act. Nina's provided some of that, but here, next slide will show us the opening words of the law, and I'll read it to you. The legislature finds that uncoordinated and unplanned growth together with a lack of common goals expressing the public's interest in the conservation and wise use of our lands, pose a threat to the environment, sustainable economic development, and the health, safety, and high quality of life enjoyed by the residents of this state. It is in the public interest that citizens, communities, local governments, and the private sector cooperate and coordinate with one another in comprehensive land use planning. So for Thurston County residents, the comp plan update process begins now. Effective participation in the process will require dogged determination and strategic thinking. Individuals, organizations, technical specialists, and common residents all have a role to play. This is a long game activity. It gets complicated because there are many players and there are many interrelated issues. But nevertheless, it's also the best opportunity to be forward-thinking and responsible stewards of this place that we call home. So Nita showed us the legislature's 14 goals for comprehensive planning. The plans themselves address these goals through 6 required topics. If you could go to the next slide, there are 6 required elements or topics of citizen interest and concern, and then 5 additional topics. And together, these elements provide the structure for the plan and for the process. Next slide. The 2 new elements, housing and climate change, will probably require the most attention this round, because rather than updating an existing vision, we'll have a fresh start to define our preferred future. It's helpful that our communities have already done some work in these 2 areas, but we need to advance that past work in order to meet the current challenge. Our jurisdictions are not required to include climate change as a part of the process. You'll see it's one of the optional elements. But in Thurston County, there's substantial interest in this element, and we should expect that it will be a part of each one of the local plans. So while it's appropriate for us to focus on the 2 new elements, you can go on back if you would, it's appropriate for us to focus on those 2 new elements. The rest of the package should not be neglected. Each element of the plan is critically important. For example, if your interest is limited to housing, you cannot ignore the elements of land use, utilities, and transportation, because they're all connected to each other. Now, next slide. The county and each city will produce their own comp plan. However, their plans must provide regional compatibility. Our communities are growing closer together and community issues are becoming more complex. We need to be working together if we hope to achieve our goals. Next slide. The launch point for each jurisdiction is defining the boundaries of the work. Our local elected representatives will set the scope and scale of their jurisdiction's comprehensive planning process. While a quality plan update is required, each government must consider their resources, opportunities, and constraints as they scope the planning work for the next couple of years. This scoping activity has no formal public input process, yet the decisions made here are foundational. Next slide. Therefore, Thurston governments need to hear about your planning priorities this summer. If your input arrives after August or perhaps September, it will not be used to establish the scope of the work. Your role is to work with your coalition member organization and identify the comp plan priorities for Thurston County and our 3 major cities. Then you must clearly communicate those needs to the electeds and the staff at each jurisdiction. And you need to get this done within a matter of weeks. To be effective in your communications, it's useful to structure your comments within the framework of the plan's elements. As the process unfolds over time, there'll be several opportunities for additional input. There'll be public meetings and surveys, review drafts, and hearings. Public participation is a major element of the plan development process. Next slide. Your role will be to track the progress of the jurisdictions, and with your organization, use these public input opportunities to influence the direction of the comprehensive plans. You need your members to attend upcoming forums prepared to provide input. You'll want to coordinate with other coalition members to find areas of common interest. And you need to identify those areas where our local governments need to change their approach to be more innovative, more collaborative, to use better metrics, or to gain a more complete understanding of the issues. It's no small task. Next slide. You need to assemble a team, and you need to get organized. You need to plan for your organization to take part for the duration of the process. Find the resources you need to learn. You need in order to learn about the process, about your specific area of interest. Connect with commerce, with local staff, with technical experts and other communities who have worked on your issue. You'll need to identify each jurisdiction's schedule and know when they are inviting public comment, and when the Planning Commission and the Council will be working on your issues. And you'll need to pace yourself. You'll need to work with others, both inside and outside the coalition. In Olympia, the last update process began in 2009, and we adopted the plan in the second half of 2014. Early public participation efforts included substantive contacts with over 1,500 residents. It included 8 chapters and 137 specific goals. The effort yielded meaningful changes in the city's direction, including strengthening the role of neighborhoods, adopting community sustainability initiatives, adjusting urban corridors, preserving scenic views, identifying focused residential development areas, planning for sea level rise, creating an implementation strategy that included ongoing performance evaluations, and much more. Next slide. The comprehensive plan will make a difference. We must not miss the opportunity to create the community that we want to see. To successfully participate, to be effective, you need to continue learning the process, articulate your priorities effectively, and organize your team to mobilize turnout and messaging at key points. And so my message is simply to wish you the very best. And thanks for being here.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you so much. So we are entering into our first Q&A time. If you want to take, that was a lot of information. If you want to take 30 seconds to put some different questions into the chat, go ahead and put them in the chat. And Melinda Hughes, the Executive Director of TCAT, has been sorting through all the different questions and will be feeding those into the chat for us. We know that there are going to be more questions and important discussion points than can possibly be discussed this evening. I think the complexity of this process has been articulated well by several of our speakers. So questions remaining after these, probably do 4 minutes, will be answered through a written and emailed question answer resource. Okay, so don't worry if your question doesn't get answered tonight, there'll be a resource coming out. So one of the questions we have here is, how is it decided how much increase in population is absorbed by each city or county? Is there someone who feels like they can?
You want me to answer that, Christy?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
And
it's a negotiation between the counties and the cities. So they all have to start working with each other. I'm not sure what the Thurston County's timeline is on this, but they need to sit down with Lacey, Tumwater, Olympia, Rochester, Bucota, you name it, and fill out the number of people that are supposed to go within their urban area, and then who goes into the county.
I can add something there too. And there was actually an update by the county, and they did a joint plan with the city of Tumwater. So in some of the resources, like in the FAQ page that everybody will get the link to later, it mentions those plans. And then also the county plan has to do a joint plan with like a joint area with the other jurisdictions as well. So those will be covered as well in all the different materials that we have. But so a little bit of depth definitely does happen for sure.
Thanks. And we're going to take one more question, just so that we have time to get through all of our presentations. I've seen this come up a few times. Is the Port of Olympia bound by the county comprehensive plan? I think that's a pretty straightforward yes or no.
It is not bound by the city's plan. It has its own plan, but it needs to coordinate with, so you can comment on the port's comp plan too. And I put the statute in the chat. I've been trying to answer questions as people are raising them. So in answer to Timothy's question about the port, you can find that in 3670A. It's in the chat. Hope that helps.
And Nina, is it correct that the port is on a different timeline?
Yes.
Okay, so they're not going through this process at the same time as the jurisdictions that we're
And
talking about.
I don't know what their timeline is, but they do have their own process, but they've got to coordinate it with the city. And Bob Jacobs, who's on here, will know that too. He was on the city council along. I don't know if Bob and I were on the city council at the same time or not, but we were on the council. And coordinated with the port.
Okay. Thank you. And quick question or answer to Walter. Yes, Commerce has a lot to do with this, and we're going to hear from two people from Commerce tonight, including our next presenter, Ann Fritzel. So Ann, I will let you take it away from here.
Thanks, Christy. Hello, everyone. Thanks for holding this forum today. We're really here because so much has changed in the GMA recently. For the next round of updates, we really want to get out to as many people as possible so they understand what the new changes are coming. We're kind of following in the footsteps of Oregon and Washington and changing in the way we do housing planning. So thank you for having us. I've been working for Department of Commerce for 20 years in growth management. Things keep changing. I've been working on housing for about 5 years. So you already saw this graphic from Nina. This is how the GMA works. The state sets these overarching goals, which guide all of our work in local planning. And then at the countywide level, we're given a certain set of topics, which are countywide responsibilities. And one of those, and housing is one of those. It's a regional issue. You know, drive till you qualify, which means it's something that we work at a regional issue. The countywide planning policies guide adoption of policies at the local comprehensive plans. So they must be consistent with the countywide and the GMA plans. So the policies in there have to have the same direction. They can't be inconsistent with the GMA. And then development regulations must implement and be consistent with the comprehensive plan policies and everything up the way. And that set, the policies and the regulations are the law. They guide your local capital facilities investments. If you're making public investments, it should be in your comprehensive plan, and how we regulate private development and any other local programs that you might have to implement your plan. Next slide, please. So these are the 5 required elements of a plan. You've seen that before. We're going to be focusing on housing. So in the last 20 years of my career, we've been looking at the comp plan, really starting with the land use plan. Like what does the land tell us? Where are the critical areas? Where are uses that make the most sense? And planning from the land use as the center. And we're kind of changing where we're planning from the housing. What are the housing needs for our communities? What kind of housing will those people need at different income segments? Where do they fit best in our community? How do we provide the land uses to accommodate them? What kind of transportation and capital facilities infrastructure do we need to assure to serve that housing that we'll need? Because as Nina said, can you go back, please? Washington we're beautiful in the summer. We can be outside. Temperate winters, people are going to come here. And so the message that we're saying, people are coming here, how do we use that energy to grow in our communities in the vision that we have set for them? So we have the 5 elements, but there's also rural. And the question is, what do we do in counties for affordable housing? Counties throughout the state are actually the whole state is experiencing a shortage of housing, and counties are like, well, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to have a variety of rural densities and not put a lot of density. There is, outside of the Puget Sound region, a lot of people living in rural areas, which creates traffic impacts, a lot of climate change impacts. Counties can also embrace housing for all needs, and we're looking at the unincorporated urban growth areas and landlords and connecting with the cities for assure sustainable, cost-effective, careful growth. Next slide, please. So here's the big news. The GMA changed in 2021. This is the biggest change I've seen in my career. We changed the GMA housing goal. I really haven't seen a change in a goal. And instead of the soft encourage affordable housing, it's plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments. And so we're still writing guidance on what does plan for and accommodate mean? How do you plan for all of those new housing people by income bracket? We did not change the requirements for the countywide planning policies. There's no specific guidance in the counties for those, but we're recommending that they think about where is the best location. How do we harmonize with other goals? What kinds of housing? How do we share out housing for the very lowest income segments as a group? Commerce is providing projections of housing need. We're going to take that projection from the Office of Financial Management for people. We're going to look at past underproduction. We have not produced enough housing since the Great Recession. There is quite a bit of housing that's been taken out of the market by private investments, by short-term rentals, by people buying housing and not actually making it available for living spaces. So accounting for those vacancies, and then looking at the household size and breaking it down into the number of housing units we'll need by income band. Can you go to the next slide, please? So on the right, you can see the income bands. 0 to 30 is the very lowest, including permanent supportive housing. Now, AMI means area median income, meaning at 100% of area median income, half the people are making more than that and half are low. So for that lowest 15%, the 0 to 30, there's no way the market is going to provide housing for those individuals. They just can't, it just won't pencil. And the numbers are really large. A lot of people are paying much more than this 30% of their income, we say affordable. And so it's going to be a shocking number at the extremely low income, how much housing is actually needed. You don't have to build it. We just set the stage. You have to plan for and accommodate. So looking at your zoning, looking at your fee structures, incentives, density bonuses, how do you consider what you need and set in place the structures to encourage the market to provide the housing you need. The requirement is that we set numbers for the extremely low, very low, low, and moderate, and not above, because the market takes care of itself. So how do we think about our zoning and our fee structures to allow the market to provide as much of that lower income housing as possible, because otherwise it's the public that has to pay for it. Next goal, please. Next slide, please. So there's more. The orange part is the piece that was added in 2021 and really looking at moderate density housing options. So where do they fit in our community? And these are home ownership options for the most part. These are for lower income people who are working hard but can't afford on a single income to buy a home. And so by having duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, you raise the possibility that those people can get into that wealth building piece that is home ownership. So that was added twice, not only in the goals and policies, but also when you look at sufficient capacity of land, can you provide for it, as well as this emergency housing, shelters, and permanent supportive housing. There's also a requirement in 1220 that you can't prohibit those kinds of housing, and that you must allow them to be created in your community because you're going to have to need to plan for them. Next slide, please. There's more. In the housing element, communities are to make adequate provisions for all those income bands, documenting programs and actions that are needed to allow those housing units to come into existence. And consider housing location in relation to employment. So that's reducing climate change, that's encouraging people live closer to work, that's including considering communities with work-live balance to reduce commuting. And then this consider role of accessory dwelling units. The law still is on the books that every community over 20,000 has to allow accessory dwelling units, but now every community has to consider the role, and we're updating the guidance that we have. The 1994 guidance that was written about ADUs, we're updating that now. Next slide, please. This is the really big piece that came along in 1220 that we're still trying to working our way through the guidance, and we're the only state I know that is requiring communities to look at that past racially disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion in housing. So that is the big lot zoning, the redlining, those areas. I know they exist in Thurston County where there's racist pieces on the deeds. Like, where are those existing? Are they still having an impact? And we know that they do through time. Are there areas where we put all our infrastructure and areas that we haven't? Who shows up at council meetings? Those people that have wealth and they own their houses and they have the knowledge to ask for what they want. And so how do we reach out to those underserved people, or start thinking about our infrastructure and how we provide it more equitably in our communities? Our plan also has to have policies that look at displacement. As development occurs, people are going to be displaced. How do we adopt policies to prevent that in the future with development? Next slide, please. So here's a little checklist when you're doing your housing updates. The housing element itself is going to be pretty minimal. It's new numbers from Commerce at this county-wide level. And because the counties have said to us, oh, that's going to be really hard to break down that by city. Can you help us? Can you provide some projections? So we'll do that. Here's the new housing units that you're going to need. Here's suggestions about how you might allocate them within different communities. And oh, here's another way for you to look at it. We're doing a second method, which is fair share. Look at what you have now by income band and think about how it might look like if you had more equitable distribution of housing units, which is probably going to make the first one look a lot better than at first glance. And then we're recommending that in an appendix, you have all the analysis that you've done, the racial equity piece and displacement, the barriers you've documented, the housing needs assessment you've done. And in Thurston County, I know that there was the housing action plan that was optional, but it sets you up wonderfully for the update because you've already done the housing needs analysis, looked at strategies that'll work within your communities, look at this new set of regulations, and you're well on your way. Also looking at the land capacity analysis. How much land do you have available for new housing at different types? The development regulations, which is where the law, there's certain changes in the GMA that happen. There's new definitions for affordable housing. There's this requirement that you must allow the shelters and permanent supportive housing. There is a piece in the GMA that regulates parking. It's really the only very specific piece in the GMA that came in the last couple of years. There was deregulation on how many people could be in a house. You still have to treat manufactured homes as consumer choice, can't be discriminated on a lot. Allow group homes and people with handicaps the same as everyone else. The legislature has been very busy in the last few years and added so many tools that communities can use to consider new ways to plan and fund housing. So I suggest those are probably already considered in your housing action plan, but there are many of them. There have been changes on appeals. So for SEPA on regulations related to increasing housing, you might take a look at 5818. And then those actions that were adopted the same time as the housing action plan funding are protected from appeal until 23. Next slide, please. This is the new deadline for updates. You'll see the 2024s got pushed back to December. That's so we can provide them the funding. In Thurston County, it's due June of 2025, which is kind of a weird mid-year, works for the state fiscal year, but less for local calendar comp plan updates. But the good news is there's historic grants. In all my time at GMS, there's never been this much money allocated to local governments to do these updates. The legislature is looking at housing, the impact on businesses' ability to hire workforce and our economic competitiveness, because we do not have the housing. And they have really pulled out the stops to provide significant pieces of funding. And so Thurston County, they'll flow June of 2023. Next slide, please. I think Nina covered this, and the fact that we do not certify plans. Next slide, please. This comes from the short course on local planning. We've always talked about process. We've never talked about what our land use planning look like. And really what for climate, for cost-effective infrastructure, for affordable housing, for physical health, this timeless, human-centered, village-sized development based along transit is the way that we are going to accommodate that extra 2.5 million people within Washington state. So we're suggesting that you take a look at how you can accommodate more housing in these kind of areas to make our cities more vibrant, more cost-effective, and to preserve our lands in rural areas. Next slide, please. Here's just a few resources. We have a website on periodic updates where you can get a full checklist. We are bringing guidance in the next 2 months on these requirements for the housing element. We've been diligently working with consultants to develop both the needs and the guidance on racial equity. We have a main page on housing, which you can get all of the material we're working on, plus this easy view website, which has examples of what other communities have done. And then the short course on local planning. If you need a basic introduction to planning, or if you have a friend that needs a basic introduction, have them Google it. They can sign up for a Zoom course like this one, and it'll give them a full, a nice basis for how to understand how planning works in Washington.
And thank you so very much. Wow, that's so much information. And it gives me that boost to say, what you were just articulating is what we need to be able to understand in and out, to be partners with our local jurisdictions, our local governments in doing this work, and for thinking about what does the scope look like, because a lot has changed in housing, it seems. So if you're like me, you've got questions. Take about a minute to put in questions that you might have into the group chat. Melinda's going to try to surface them to the top that recur or are more easily answerable in this forum. And questions that we don't get to, we will do a thorough written and emailed resource later.
Do you want me to take some of these questions?
Yeah, let's do about 30 seconds where people can write and process quietly, and then we'll start in. And yes, I think that was Anne. Absolutely, take some of these questions.
Well, one is the parks planning, and that was it's optional because the legislature didn't provide funding at the time. That was added to the GMA. But if you want state funding for parks, there is a requirement through another agency to have a plan. You want to feed me questions?
Melinda, could you put those in the chat?
Oh, there is a question about private investors owning housing. There's really nothing on the books that we can do to prevent that at the time. We don't even have a good source of research. Zillow just stopped their private research to understand how much private investment there is. We think it's like 2%, mostly in the Sun Belt area, but I heard from Enacted there was a 50 house development and a company came and bought like, I don't know, half of them. So it's also happening here, the newer development, because it's lower maintenance.
Here's a question in the chat. Does this planning include possible regulations to limit the amount of housing that private investors? Okay, so I think you
I
just
answered that one.
spoke to that one.
I just popped another one that it came in with under Ann. There was a bunch of, I'm catching all the ideas that come through as well. So I'm catching the ideas as well as the questions. I just popped another one into the chat, Ann. It kind of has a little context with it. It just basically says, I'm also seeing permanent supportive housing being called out here, which is fantastic, but are there also conversations occurring on how we can provide the appropriate level of funding required to operate permanent supportive housing complexes? Do these plans financially allocate a general level of funding based on projections? I can't answer that for the housing side, but I can answer it for the climate. We are having a lot of conversations about that, and that's a whole different topic. But I know it's happening on the climate side. I don't know if anybody knows about housing though.
The numbers are stunning if you think about how much housing we need and how we must build it and operate it. So right now we're just gathering those numbers. We've been working with stakeholders all over the state to identify those needs. And then we'll put them together and provide them to the state and the federal government and see what happens. Local governments also have a lot more tools than they've ever had to support housing.
And I want to highlight Louisa saying, what resources would you recommend for helping young people get involved in this process? Is there anything specifically tailored outside of the work that we're trying to pull together here?
Gosh, take a short course. I would think at the local level, the leaders are ones that have been around and know the ins and outs, can help identify the opportunities. But these are young people that are graduating from college and looking around and not able to buy a house. How do we help? How do we create communities with regulations that will allow the kind of housing that our young people can buy? I realize that dream.
I do know that there's one jurisdiction in Thurston County, and that's Lacey, that has a youth council. And I think it would be great for some of the other ones to do that as well. But I'm not sure if that'll end up happening. And by the way, the powerful message, we're having conversations with a lot of Olympia council members, and the die-in that the youth climate activists did not long ago. I keep hearing that it's a very powerful message that was heard. So very good, Louisa, and everybody else that worked on that. Good job.
I'm just going to jump in here real quick and say that I am very impressed with everyone who's on this Zoom call tonight. Louisa, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Cyber. Anybody who's under 35, I guess, should be commended to be here, because this is your future. And the way to get involved is now, and taking a short course and starting to look for some of these classes online or some information. And the other one, if you're still in college, you should ask your faculty if you can figure out how to do an internship with some of this. So get credit, get job experience, get a job in land use planning. And also decide how your future community is going to look, because it's going to change quickly. So I just think this is a really good forum. And so August 17th is the next time we're going to connect, I think. I'll turn it back over to Loretta and organizers.
Thank you, Nina. Yes, I'm laughing. I just missed your cutoff, your age cutoff. No, I'm happy, and Louisa and other folks that are potentially graduating college, are mid-career, if you would like to organize as well, we can talk about that. I know I have several friends that couldn't be here just because of timing and young children and that kind of thing. So every age band has different capacity.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because, like, for me, I'm a sophomore in college, and so, like, trying to get my friends to understand the importance of comprehensive planning can sometimes be a little bit difficult.
Yeah. we should connect them. Yeah. Okay, we are going to bop back over here and get started with Sarah Fox is going to kick off our climate section. Again, we've got 2 speakers in this. So Sarah, I'll give you a heads up when there's a 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. I am Sarah Fox. I joined Commerce last fall, but I was a local planner for about 18 years. I'm going to provide this overview of our climate program, which includes a small team of 3 of us. But we are also coordinating an interagency partnership that includes 6 state agencies. Whoops, what did I do? Okay, next slide. So this slide is just, okay, there we go. I was going to say we're just introducing you to commerce, but we've talked a lot about commerce already. So why now? So in 2021, the legislature gave commerce a head start on climate planning by asking us to lead this team of state agencies and deliver to them a model climate change element that cities and counties could adopt into their 20-year comprehensive plans. As we've been hearing tonight, these local comprehensive plans are updated every 8 years, typically, and so this model climate change element, when it's complete, will be considered an optional element. However, it will be in good company with the other voluntary elements, such as the economic development and parks that some comprehensive plans are including. Next slide. The model element will include 2 sub-elements, mitigation sub-element and a resiliency sub-element. And the model will also ensure that the policies and actions maximize what we're calling co-benefits, which I'll explain later, but they will also prioritize actions that will uplift communities that have historically been impacted by climate change. Next slide. So next, I'll just focus a little bit on each of the sub-elements. So the mitigation sub-element in the context of this project means efforts to reduce or prevent the emission of greenhouse gases. This sub-element will identify actions to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and it'll identify strategies, including reducing per capita vehicle miles traveled within a jurisdiction. Next slide. Resilience sub-element in the context of this project means adapting to changing climate conditions by withstanding the effects of a disaster and being able to rebound from it. The sub-element will provide guidance that will start with climate projections and impact scenarios. Then it will focus and address hazards that are exacerbated by climate change. The resilience sub-element will also include measures to identify, protect, and enhance natural areas and habitat. Next slide. So we're working through this project. It was funded for 2 years, and we've broken it up into different phases. So in the first part of the project, which started this fall when I joined the team, was to really establish those partnerships. And also we included a few contractors that would basically add value to the project. One of them is a collaboration with the company Front and Centered, which will bring the voices of the historically overburdened people in our community into the project. And we're also adding a contractor that's going to be leading a pilot program that starts in the fall. In the definition phase, which we just completed over the spring, it was all about basically collecting all of the best climate goals and policies from all of our partners that we've been involving. And then we began drafting companion planning guidance pieces. Right now, we're considering ourselves in the design phase, which means that we are developing a prioritization method to really help sort through the best goals and policies that we received to ensure that we have a set of goals and policies that are applicable to a jurisdiction of any size. The next phase, the momentum phase, is when we're really launching that pilot program. We'll be selecting 3 small cities outside of the largest metropolitan areas, but we'll be testing our guidance and this model element on how they will integrate it into their comprehensive plan. And the final draft phase will really be the time we kind of share our draft to date with anyone who wants to see it. It'll be out on our website. We'll be distributing it widely, getting your feedback on how we've done so far, and concluding in June of 2023. Next slide. So as I was mentioning, we have a lot of partners on this project. We have the 6 state agencies, Ecology, Department of Transportation, Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, Health, and the Emergency Management Division. We're also working with our tribal communities, as I mentioned, the frontline communities. And then we have about 200 planners from cities and counties and regional organizations that we're collaborating with. And next, final slide. So this is our team members and the way to contact us with any questions and hopefully to check in on our progress. How did I do on time?
You are so fast on time. Thank you. So let's take a few minutes for questions that people have. If you want to process what Sarah was talking about, and questions, go ahead and put them in the chat.
Okay, so the tribal leaders, we had a meeting in March where we invited 150 tribal leaders to join us for a conversation where we introduced the project and got feedback on their initial thoughts. And then we are holding another meeting in September, and we haven't quite worked out the details yet. We are hoping to collaborate at the ATNI, but it's the North American Tribal Association convention that they're having. I totally butchered the entire acronym there, but there's a convention in September that we're hoping to just be a part of that agenda rather than hold a separate meeting. So that should be solved in the next couple of weeks, and we'll have more information at that time. And I don't know if I see any other questions about. I think that was the only question I see about climate change in there. So
I think a question that I have, a potential observation and question is, it looks like the timelines for this draft element being released are different than the timelines for the Thurston County and local jurisdictions to update. So it looks like a little bit of a mismatch. Can you speak to that? And how we might be able to use this that you presented on? Yes,
our timeline for work doesn't match with the first round of comprehensive plan updates at all. So that was something first day on the job. I heard from all the Puget Sound regions, like, why can't this be done this summer? And I'm like, well, so you want me to get 2 years worth of work done in 6 months? That's not going to happen. But we are working really closely with all of them. Like I said, we have planners and from all over the state, but we are working with the regional organizations in Puget Sound with their work, trying to support them. And we also provided $2.5 million of grant funding to support their work this year. So we'll be awarding those grants, and actually by tomorrow I'll be sending out some letters. But so hopefully that'll support their climate work in advance of us having our guidance done.
I appreciate that. There's a lot of rolling updates. So Thurston is at a different time than a lot of other counties. So it'll work for some and not for others. And I think Louisa has a question she's typing in, and that will be our last question before we move to our next speaker.
Louisa, yes, the climate guidelines we are going to provide goals and policies that can be integrated throughout your entire comprehensive plan. And thank you, Robert Marino, for the help with with the name of the organization.
Thank you, everyone, for the good questions. Thank you, Sarah, for your work and the information you gave us here. And we're going to toss this over to Dr. Ellie Klaus-McGann. Ellie.
Hello. So I'm Ellie Klaus-McGann with Climate Pierce County, and I'm here to share some thoughts on climate policy and comprehensive plans as you prepare for your comprehensive plan update cycle. The focus will be on the county and the 3 cities of Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater, but the thinking extends to all of Thurston's cities. Next slide. We'll take a look in broad brushstrokes where Thurston is now, why advocate for more in comprehensive plans, and a glance at Pierce County policy work for contrast and some final thoughts. Next slide. Thurston County has already done some amazing work through the efforts of TCAT and others on policy and climate actions, most recently with the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan and the Thurston Climate Adaptation Plan. Here in Pierce County, we've used your work as reference point when talking to our Pierce County elected leaders. Lacey added the TCMP as an amendment to its comp plan in their 2021 update, and Tumwater has it as a policy statement within its comp plan. And my understanding is that there is now an implementation plan with a budget allocation to get the actions going. Next slide. The Thurston County Planning Policies has one policy specifically identifying climate, and in an appendix has the 2013 Sustainable Development Plan, which has climate policies from 2013. The reason why I mention this is because comprehensive plans are required to be consistent with the countywide planning policies. Next slide. We all know we're in a climate emergency and that action is urgently required. Comprehensive plan updates for Thurston will span from 2025 to 2045 in vision, goals, and policies, even though they're updated every 8 years. Having things in a comp plan gives you a powerful community tool for holding municipalities accountable. Putting it in the comprehensive plan gives a legal basis for the work. The major plans, stormwater plan, hazard mitigation plan, etc., in the comp plan form the basis for applying for grant funding. If it's not in a city plan showing intention, funding is much less likely from like federal sources. If it is a goal or policy in the comp plan, then that is a platform to demand for funding during the budget cycle and for inclusion in the capital facilities plan. So it really matters if it's in the comp plan or not. Next slide. We'll take a look at some examples of climate policies in the comp plans of the county, Olympia, Tumwater, and Lacey. So this slide has links to where I found climate actions in the comp plans. The link provided here for Lacey is not on the Lacey website, and actually the Lacey website is a little difficult to navigate to get to the comp plan. Next slide. So just a heads up. Starting with the county, I've just picked some examples of policies to share the language that's used. The topic should all sound familiar as these are all addressed in the 2 plans, TCMP and TCAP. The county has about 13 policies addressing climate change directly, found in the natural hazard section of the environment, recreation, and open spaces chapters. You can also find climate related policies in some of the other chapters. So looking at the natural hazards section, the greenhouse gas policies, the language that you see is should promote energy efficiency, should promote efficient and healthier transportation options, and should establish basically a climate lens for transportation, land use, and development. So all shoulds. Next slide, please. Policies for climate resilience and climate impacts say the county should plan and prepare to mitigate for increased droughts, etc., and factor climate impacts in disaster response and recovery planning by the responsible organizations. So for instance, was the response to last year's heat dome adequate and in place for handing out water, getting folks to cooling shelters, etc.? Next slide. So in contrast, Olympia has climate related policies almost throughout its comprehensive plan, and the policies are both more specific and numerous. The language is also quite different from the county language that start with should and factor. Here we will see reduce, pursue, encourage, and sometimes require, build, expand. So in the natural environment, I've only picked 2, and keep in mind, this is out of context because you're not seeing all of the actions, just some of them, or all of the policies, just some of them. So here in the natural environment, it says reduce the use of fossil fuels and creations of greenhouse gas, reduce the pollution and energy consumption of transportation. If we move over to land use in the next slide, pursue partnerships to promote energy efficient construction, encourage and sometimes require buildings and site designs for energy efficiency and renewables. So this points to not quite fossil fuel free construction, but getting there. Next slide. In transportation, it's build a system encouraging walking, multimodal transportation, encourage transit, supportive density. And next slide. In utilities, reduce waste and encourage recycling. So the language is important because the difference between should and these kind of verbs are should leaves a little bit of wiggle room, and that's something to think about. So now we're going to look at Tumwater. So next slide. It has most of its climate policies in the conservation chapter, but there is a list of goals from the 2013 sustainability plan in the land use chapter, including priority goal 9 on moving to carbon neutrality. You see in 1.6, these are the greenhouse gas reduction goals from the TCMP. It has implementing the strategies from TCMP directly in the comp plan. And in transportation, it has promote transportation efficient development and redevelopment in site public services and facilities where transit, walking, biking are now or will be alternatives. So I don't need to read all that, but you get the idea. So language is similar to what you see in the Olympia plan, slightly different from what you see in the Thurston comp plan. Next slide. So Lacey is interesting because it has not only what should happen, but an idea on how to make it happen. So its climate policies are mostly in the environmental element within the 2012 carbon reduction and resiliency plan. It does have the TCMP as an appendix, and it has some policies spread throughout its comp plan as in land use. So if you look at this first one, policy C is retrofit heating, cooling. No, we're still on the same slide. Sorry about that. Retrofit heating, cooling, ventilation, and heat recovery systems and equipment to maximize energy efficiency. So that's the policy, but how are you going to do it? Well, utilize funding strategies such as investment grade audits, etc. And then in the land use element, here's the transportation and land use, provide incentives for new development located within a quarter mile of inner city transit. So that is that density and reducing vehicle miles traveled. And how? Well, use development incentives that could include, but are not limited to, density increases, increased square footage, etc. So those are two different pieces that we don't see in the other policies that we have looked at. Next slide, please. So now that you've seen examples of the language that currently exists, some things to know and think about. Language either provides wiggle room or it doesn't. The comp plan update cycle for Thurston requires the plan to be submitted by June 30th, 2025, but in practicality, that probably means having things done by December 2024. Planning departments will be starting this work soon. Since each jurisdiction approaches climate differently in their comprehensive plans in terms of where it's located and at what level of detail, and our job is to hold cities and counties accountable against the vision, goals, and policies that we help to create in the comp plans, might want to think about how can you influence the work to make it easier to do this, to track what's going on. So one possibility could be, should each city have its own tailored climate plan based on the TCMP to make it easier to track and ask about what is happening locally for local folks? Excuse me, do I have 2 minutes?
1 minute.
1 minute left. Okay, so next slide. So real quickly, I've just added this for reference. This is the Gma comp plan, and it's got 5 policies that you might want to consider. The first one is about our climate action plan, which was just updated. Next slide. Okay, and so some of the language here, maintain, implement, assess, protect. Next slide. And just for us, the countywide planning policies have never had climate in them, and now they do. There's 28 policies, so that's something to think about when you think about your own countywide planning policies. And then next slide. As we zoom through this some more, there we go. So what can you do? You can get on the interested party list and e-newsletter list for your city. Olympia already has that on its website. Advocate for climate justice lens and make use of the HEAL Act's Washington State's Environmental Health Disparities Map to get at climate justice actions. Ask for how climate actions will be tracked, and then ask about budget. How is it going to be funded? And next slide. Here are a couple more resources that could be helpful as you think about what you want to ask for in the comp plans. And then lastly, I'm happy to talk via email, and thank you, and looking forward to following the work and maybe doing some copycatting as well.
Thank you so much. That is a lot of wonderful information, and I know your intention is to have these slides as a resource to look back at as well. Thank you,
Yes.
thank you. So we'll take probably about 3 minutes. We'll have a quick wrap up tonight. So let's take 3 minutes for questions. And as people are, so go ahead, write in the chat any questions that you have for Ellie, and we can answer those, a couple of them as they come in.
I can add a little bit about the Lacey. Lacey is a little bit different than the other jurisdictions, that when they actually pass municipal laws, that actually goes into the long range plan, which also then ends up in the comp plan, which is really strange and complex, but they are 100% a different animal compared to the other jurisdictions. But it's, so yeah, so they're definitely different, which is not a bad thing, but could be a bad thing. I don't know, it depends on the day. So
Thanks, Melinda. I just want to note, each of our presenters has really highlighted or spotlighted a different thing, and what I'm really taking from Ellie's presentation is the importance of language and alignment through all of these pieces, and that you can't make assumptions that if it's at one level, that it is required at another level, and language matters. Is Climate Pierce County an NGO? Are you a nonprofit organization?
We're actually a
non-governmental?
volunteer organization. We're a coalition of multiple organizations here in Pierce County who have come together to work on climate.
Thank you. What is the state and the Department of Commerce doing to require large businesses collaborating efforts to reduce greenhouse gases? That one's really more for the state and department. I want to let them answer that as a follow-up resource. Ellie, what do you wish was in the Pierce County or Tacoma comp plans on climate that's not in there right now?
So for us, we're, as I said, we're taking baby steps in some ways. We do have the Pierce County Sustainability Plan, but it's not a regional plan. So for us, it's really just getting climate action into comp plans in Pierce County cities. That is our main focus because it doesn't exist in most of the comp plans in Pierce County. In the Tacoma comp plan is fine the way it is because our climate action plan is really robust and the city is working hard on it. It has a good equity focus, which is important for us. So yeah, I mean, what Climate Pierce County is going to be doing is we're taking our countywide planning policies and turning that into a document where we can go and ask our cities, you know, it's in the countywide planning policies, now get it into your comp plan and tell us how you're going to make it happen. So again, you're a step ahead of us.
Well, I appreciate it's good to work in partnership across the regions because housing and climate change certainly don't really know boundaries that way. So
Yes.
very much appreciate it.
Christy,
Yes,
can I just
Nina.
make one last comment to
Please.
the audience? The words matter in these comp plans. So the words should, I think I put it in the comments section, that is easily thrown out by the Growth Management Hearings Board. Unless there's lots of evidence to show why the city or county did something, you should always push for shall, if possible, but that's going to be really hard. And then I said, learn to compromise a little bit, but it's just those words really matter about what's required versus recommended, that sort of thing. So thank you for pointing that, whoever was speaking about that earlier. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Nina. Yeah, language matters, and this is time to put the legal language hat on, not the how to politely make a request hat on. So it feels a little bit different sometimes. Yeah, but it matters. Okay, so just to wrap up, we've had a lot of information. I don't know, your head might be spinning like mine. and that's great. We've heard a lot about the some of the plan guidance and requirements, what local jurisdictions have been working on, a lot about how language matters. And I'm taking away a lot of what I need to learn in order to be part of this engagement process. I feel like I've learned a lot in this presentation, and I'm coming away with a sense of I need to learn a lot more. So if anyone is leaving with more questions than they leave with answers, I'm in the same boat, but it's a good boat to be in, and I'm glad to be in it with you. What's next? Melinda, do you want to take this?
Sure, I definitely can. I'm going to pop a couple websites into the chat right now. This is where we're going to have some updates. The first one is going to be the landing page for the Local Good Governance Coalition, where we're going to be posting updates and events, and we're going to be posting the recording from this event, as well as there's an FAQ there, and I'm going to actually pop that into the chat here in a second. We have a lot of things like, what is the comp plan? What is the Growth Management Act? What do we want to get as goals as the coalition? How people can get involved. And I'm also, Carly Cogan with the Habitat for Humanity was supposed to be here tonight, but she had an emergency. So I'm going to put their link into the chat as well to keep up on updates on housing. So I'm going to plop that in real quick. But basically, when it comes to climate, I mean, it's not just about our generation, but it's also about like our grandchildren or our great grandchildren. And so comp plans, while it's looking at a 10-year period now, it actually is going to affect decades. You know, like when you get those 75,000 people coming in that's expected, that's gonna, you know, that's a major problem when it comes to greenhouse gases. So if we don't get these things under control, the housing and the climate change now, I think that we're gonna have some serious problems in the future. But I'm not going to keep everybody too long because it's 7:57 now. I know a lot of bit information. One thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be following up with an email about, you know, if you want to stay in contact about what's next, how you can get involved in the comp plan process, as well as the comp plan process for your specific jurisdiction. We're going to follow up with an email and let you know how to do that. It's probably going to happen next week since it's Friday already, and Zoom doesn't make that easy. But so, yeah, I think that's the main thing I want to leave everybody with is the basic thing is to get involved now. Tell your friends and family why they should get involved too, because the power, as Nina has stated and Christy has stated, is really with the people on this. We are the ones that have to bring it. And so while we're a little bit ahead of Pierce, we have a long ways to go to be where we need for those future generations. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you, Melinda. And yes, our next meeting, formal meeting, is a comprehensive plan introduction with city and county planning staff. And we'll be breaking up more by jurisdiction at that meeting. It will be at Squaxin Park, formerly Priest Point Park, August 17th at 6:30 at the Rose Garden Shelter. So that will be in person in an outdoor space, co-hosted by the League of Women Voters. Today we've heard from the state and from other different coalitions. This will be your chance to meet with city and county planning staff. We'd highly recommend within your different groups, meeting and talking and going through these resources before that point. Right. So please do reach out to the Good Governance Coalition if you want to think about how to structure some of those opportunities, or thinking about, well, in our smaller groups, how do we want to try to make sense of this and think about this? And we'll have some things in the follow-up resources about that as well. That's what I have. Loretta, anything to finish us tonight?
I have learned a lot. I hope everyone else has. I think we should, in the reaction place, if you want to clap your hands or give other reactions for our great speakers, you can do it there. There's hearts, there's all kinds of things. So thank you everybody for participating this evening and learning and being ready to work together to make our comprehensive plans really reflect the vision of our communities into the long, long future. Thank you.
Thank you all, and good night. Till next time.